the silence was deafening. It pressed in on me, filling the large, empty rooms of my house with a loneliness I hadn't anticipated. My husband, bless his soul, had passed away a few years ago, and I'd been living alone ever since. For the first time in what felt like forever, I had no one to take care of. No husband to fuss over, no children to raise. Just me, Sarah, a 55-year-old widow rattling around in a house that suddenly felt far too big. After my husband's passing, I'd briefly considered moving in with my son, Caspian, and his wife, Emberly. But something held me back. It wasn't that I didn't love Caspian, but there had always been a tension between us. And Emberly, well, she didn't exactly make things easier. They ran a bar together, a noisy, bustling place that seemed to swallow them whole. I knew if I lived with them, I'd be expected to help out, to serve customers, to be part of the family business. But the thought of it exhausted me. I wasn't as young as I used to be, and frankly, I wasn't sure I had the energy for that kind of life anymore. Besides, I wasn't much of a people person, never had been, so I stayed in my own home, grateful that Caspian never pushed the issue. At first, the solitude felt like a blessing. Freedom, after years of caring for others. I imagined peaceful days filled with hobbies, maybe some new friends, a chance to finally explore my own interests, but that's not quite how it turned out. The hobbies never stuck. The friends never materialized. The silence, once a welcome respite, became a constant, unwelcome companion. I spent my days watching reruns of old TV shows, the flickering images a poor substitute for human connection. The house, once filled with the sounds of family life, now echoed with emptiness. The only bright spots in my monotonous existence were my granddaughters, Alana and Xenia. Alana, the elder, was a ray of sunshine, always cheerful and full of energy. Xenia, on the other hand, was quieter, more reserved. She often seemed to fade into the background, overshadowed by her vibrant sister. Each time Caspian and Emberly brought the girls to visit, my heart ached a little more for Xenia. Alana would bound in, dressed in new clothes, her hair perfectly styled, a smile lighting up her face. Xenia, meanwhile, would trail behind, wearing Alana's hand-me-downs, her hair unkempt, her eyes downcast. It was as if she carried the weight of the world on her small shoulders. I tried not to interfere. I knew it wasn't my place to tell Caspian and Emberly how to raise their children. But with each visit, my concern grew. The way they doted on Alana, showering her with praise and attention, while Xenia seemed almost invisible. The way Alana would interrupt Xenia whenever she tried to speak, and how Caspian and Emberly would simply ignore her, as if she wasn't even there. It was subtle, perhaps unintentional, but it was there nonetheless, and it was breaking my heart. One day, I decided to visit Caspian and Emberly. I baked a batch of their favorite cookies, hoping to spend a pleasant afternoon with my granddaughters. But as I approached their house, I heard shouting. Caspian's voice, sharp and angry, cut through the quiet afternoon. "Why don't you say something for once instead of staying quiet all the time?" My heart pounded in my chest. I hesitated at the doorstep, unsure whether to knock or turn back. Before I could make up my mind, the door swung open. Without thinking, I stepped inside, slipping off my shoes. The shouting grew louder as I walked down the hallway. "You know it's her fault, right? Your silence embarrasses us." I followed the sound of the voices, my anxiety growing with each step. I found them upstairs, in one of the bedrooms. Caspian and Emberly were standing over Xenia, who was huddled on the floor, her face streaked with tears. Alana stood nearby, her hand raised as if she had just struck her sister. Something snapped inside me. I pushed past Caspian and Emberly, rushing to Xenia's side. I knelt beside her, gathering her into my arms. Alana stared at me, wide-eyed, while Caspian and Emberly looked on in stunned silence. "Mom, what are you doing barging in like this? You should have knocked," Caspian finally sputtered, his face flushed with anger. "That's right, Sarah." "Isn't this a bit rude?" Emberly chimed in, her voice dripping with disapproval. I glared at them both, my own anger rising. What's rude is what you're doing to this little girl, surrounding her like this, yelling at her. "Caspian, you're her father. Aren't you ashamed to treat your own child this way? And Alana, why did you hit your sister? Alana flinched at my words, her eyes darting nervously towards her parents. Before she could answer, Emberly pulled her close, her voice sharp and defensive. Don't blame Alana for this, but I wasn't backing down. A mother's job isn't to protect a child who's done wrong, Emberly. You should be teaching her right from wrong, not defending her behavior. Caspian, who had been watching silently, suddenly exploded. Mom, what are you thinking? Get away from that idiot. His words struck me like a physical blow. The idiots are you and Emberly. You owe Xenia an apology, I shouted back. Apologize. Who's going to apologize to her? Caspian sneered, his face contorted with disdain. Neither he, nor Emberly, nor Alana showed any remorse. They continued to hurl insults at Xenia, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Xenia, still clinging to me, seemed to have retreated into herself, her face blank and expressionless, as if she had endured this kind of treatment for far too long. In that moment, something shifted within me. A fierce protectiveness surged through me, a determination to shield this child from further pain. I scooped Xenia into my arms, my voice firm and resolute. I'm taking care of Xenia from now on. I can't leave her in this house. Without waiting for a response, I marched out of the room, Xenia clutched tightly in my arms. Caspian followed, a smug grin spreading across his face. Thanks, Mom. I didn't know what to do with that mute anyway, he said casually, as if he had just solved a minor inconvenience. I stopped dead in my tracks, my blood running cold. My own son, my own flesh and blood, was treating his daughter like a burden, a problem to be disposed of. Emberly appeared behind him, holding a small worn-out bag and a tattered backpack. Here's Xenia's stuff, she said, thrusting them into my hands. Please take care of the rest. Xenia and I stared at them, speechless. Their faces were cold, devoid of any emotion, almost relieved to be rid of her. Without another word, I turned and walked away, the weight of their cruelty heavy on my heart. Back at my house, I helped Xenia take off her shoes. As I knelt before her, I saw her tiny hands clench into fists, her lower lip trembling as she fought back tears. My heart ached for her. I pulled her close, holding her tightly. Xenia, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I didn't help you sooner. But it's going to be okay now. Grandma's here, and I'm going to protect you, from now on. And so, Xenia and I began our new life together. But the damage had been done. The years of neglect and emotional abuse had taken their toll. Xenia, once a bright and lively child, had retreated into a shell of silence. She stopped speaking altogether. Not a single word, even simple greetings like, "Good morning," seemed beyond her reach. Her teacher told me she wasn't communicating at school either, not with her classmates, not with the teachers. Worried, I took her to the hospital for a checkup. The doctor explained that Xenia was suffering from selective mutism, a condition often triggered by severe stress and anxiety. It wasn't that she didn't want to speak, she simply couldn't. The words seemed to get stuck in her throat, trapped by an invisible barrier of fear. The doctor assured me that with time and a loving, supportive environment, Xenia would gradually regain her voice. On the way home, I bought her a notebook and a set of colorful pens. Xenia, I said, handing them to her. If there's something you want to say but can't, write it in this notebook. You can draw pictures, write words, whatever you feel like. And maybe, little by little, you can try saying those words out loud. It doesn't have to be all at once, just a little at a time. Okay? Xenia's eyes lit up. She immediately opened the notebook and started writing. A few moments later, she turned it around to show me. On the page, she had written, "Thank you, Grandma," along with a small, slightly lopsided drawing of my face. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no sound came out. Her face fell, and I could see the disappointment in her eyes. I smiled and patted her head. "You're doing great, Xenia. You've already taken the first step, and I'm so proud of you. One step at a time, okay? You've got this." A faint smile flickered across her face. From that day on, Xenia used her notebook to communicate, both at home and at school. Gradually, she began to regain her confidence. It was a slow process, but over the next 2 years, she started to speak again. "Grandma, Grandma, guess what happened at school today?" she would exclaim, her voice filled with excitement, her eyes sparkling with joy. Seeing her recover, seeing her laugh and play and simply be a child again, filled me with a sense of pride and relief I can't even describe. It was as if the dark clouds that had been shadowing her had finally parted, allowing the sunshine to break through. Life with Xenia was a joy. Watching her blossom and grow, her laughter filling the house once more, made all the heartache of the past fade away. One day, I attended a parent-teacher conference at her school. "Hello, Sarah. Hello, Xenia," her teacher greeted us warmly, a kind smile on her face. As we sat down, she pulled out Xenia's report card. "Her grades have improved steadily since last year," she said, pointing to a chart that tracked Xenia's academic progress. The upward trend was undeniable. Xenia had been excelling ever since she came to live with me. "She's been studying so hard," I explained, beaming with pride. At home, she's always reading books and solving difficult problems. Since regaining her voice, Xenia had developed a voracious appetite for learning. Every time she aced a test, she would bring home the results with a triumphant grin, and I would proudly display her perfect papers on the wall. Seeing her thrive, both academically and emotionally, was the greatest reward I could have asked for. "I think it might be a good idea for Xenia to take an IQ test at the hospital," the teacher suggested. "An IQ test? What for?" I asked, surprised. The teacher explained that Xenia might be what they called gifted, a term used for children who possess exceptional intelligence. According to her, Xenia seemed remarkably bright, even compared to most adults. The idea intrigued me. If Xenia was indeed gifted, it would explain why she found her schoolwork so easy. The teacher believed an IQ test could help us understand her abilities better and provide her with the right learning environment to nurture her talents. Without hesitation, I took Xenia to the hospital for the test. As it turned out, the teacher was right. Xenia was gifted. Her IQ was well above average, placing her in the top percentile of children her age. I was stunned, amazed to learn that my granddaughter possessed such extraordinary intellectual capabilities. Later that day, I sat down with Xenia. "How do you find school?" I asked. "Do you enjoy your studies?" Xenia shrugged, a bored expression on her face. "Honestly, it's too easy. I find it boring. I want to study something more challenging, but when I try to tell the teacher, they just don't understand." Her words gave me pause. I began to wonder if there was a way to challenge her mind in ways her current school couldn't. Her academic needs seemed far beyond the elementary school level, perhaps even at the middle or high school level. But could Xenia, a young girl who hadn't even graduated from elementary school yet, handle such advanced studies? I consulted with her teacher again, who told me about a system in the US where students could skip grades based on their academic abilities. She suggested that if we moved to America, Xenia might have the opportunity to study at a level more suited to her extraordinary talents. This reminded me of my late husband's brother, who had been living and working in the US. Although I hadn't been in contact with him since my husband's passing, I decided to reach out for advice. When I explained the situation, he immediately offered his support, saying he would help us settle into life in America. Feeling a surge of hope, I broached the subject with Xenia. "What do you think about studying abroad?" I asked. She listened intently, then a smile spread across her face. "I want to go," she said. "But only if it's with you, Grandma. And I want to graduate elementary school with my friends first." Touched by her thoughtfulness, I readily agreed. "Of course, we'll wait until you graduate, and in the meantime, I'll work on improving my English." Xenia's smile widened. The next few months were filled with happy memories as Xenia made the most of her final year in elementary school, strengthening friendships and savoring her time with her classmates. When she finally graduated, we exchanged contact information with her friends, promising to stay in touch even after we moved overseas. I decided not to tell Caspian and Emberly about our plans. I feared they might try to take Xenia back if they found out she was gifted, only to exploit her abilities for their own gain. It was a painful decision, but I felt it was necessary to protect Xenia from further harm. Our move to America was a fresh start, a chance to leave the pain of the past behind and embrace a future filled with possibilities. Xenia adjusted quickly, skipping grades and throwing herself into her studies with renewed enthusiasm. I supported her in every way I could, and seeing her excitement about learning again reassured me that we had made the right decision. As time went on, Xenia's talents truly began to shine. She not only excelled in school, but eventually enrolled at Harvard University, where she studied business. Before I knew it, she had started her own company, her ambition and drive taking her to heights I could only have dreamed of. "I want to repay you, Grandma," she often said, her eyes filled with gratitude. But to me, she had already repaid me in the best way possible, by growing into a brilliant, capable, and kind-hearted young woman. Xenia's success didn't go unnoticed. Her achievements were featured in American news outlets, and soon her name was known around the world. She became a celebrity in her own right, her story inspiring countless others. I often wondered what Caspian and Emberly thought of her accomplishments. Did they regret the way they had treated her? I hoped for their sake they did. 10 years after Xenia started her company, we had to return to our home country for business reasons. We rented a new apartment, trying to stay under the radar. But one afternoon, the doorbell rang. Thinking it was a delivery, I opened the door without a second thought. "Mom, it's been a while. How have you been?" Caspian's voice hit me like a wave of shock. Standing beside him was Emberly, a forced smile plastered on her face. I couldn't hide my surprise. "Caspian, Emberly, what are you doing here?" They ignored my question. Emberly stepped closer, calling into the house. "Xenia, we've come to see you. It's your mom and dad." I quickly moved to block the door. "What do you want? Please don't come near my daughter." Caspian gave me a pitying look. "Don't be so cold, Mom. We're still her parents. We just want to see her, that's all." "Yes, mother-in-law," Emberly chimed in, her tone saccharine sweet. "We're family after all. Please, let us talk to her." Before I could stop them, they pushed past me and entered the house. Xenia, hearing the commotion, peeked out from the living room. "What's going on, Grandma?" she asked, her eyes widening in surprise as they landed on Caspian and Emberly. Caspian and Emberly, however, seemed thrilled to see her. "Oh, Xenia, look at you! You've grown so much!" Emberly exclaimed, reaching out to hug her, but Xenia brushed her off coldly. "If you want to talk, we can do it in the living room. I'll make some tea," she said, her voice icy. Without waiting for a reply, she went into the kitchen. Caspian and Emberly, unfazed, plopped down on the sofa and began reminiscing loudly, as if nothing had ever happened. Feeling uneasy, I glanced at Xenia, who winked at me, signaling that she had everything under control. As I sat down opposite them, the conversation quickly turned to the real reason for their visit. The bar they had been running had gone under due to poor management, and Alana, their eldest daughter, had disappeared, cutting off all contact with them. Now jobless and struggling financially, Caspian and Emberly were desperate. "Xenia, would you consider supporting us?" Caspian asked, his voice filled with desperation. "You may have left when you were little, but we raised you for 6 years. You owe us." "That's right," Emberly added, her tone pleading. "We're still your family. Let's make up for lost time. Let's live together and create new memories." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could they, after everything they had done, come crawling back to Xenia, expecting her to help them now that she was successful? Before I could say anything, Xenia's voice cut through the tension. "Idiots aren't my family," she said, her expression calm and composed. "My only family is Grandma. Now please leave." Caspian and Emberly stared at her in disbelief, but Xenia stood firm, calmly walking to the door and opening it. "Goodbye." With a final click of the door lock, Caspian and Emberly were gone, slinking away in defeat. I watched them go, still in shock. But when I turned to Xenia, she just smiled. "Grandma," she said, "how about we move?" She explained that she had been secretly planning to build a house for the two of us, designed with accessibility features to make sure I would be comfortable as I aged. I couldn't hold back my tears. "Thank you, Xenia," I whispered, my heart overflowing with gratitude. She just blushed and gave an embarrassed laugh. Several months later, we moved into our new home. It was beautiful, filled with light and laughter. The walls were adorned with photos, capturing precious moments we had shared over the years. Xenia's graduation, her first day at Harvard, the day she launched her company. Even the notebook and pen we had bought when she first came to live with me were framed and displayed on a shelf, a reminder of how far she had come. Every time I looked at them, I felt a surge of pride and love. Xenia had thought of everything. The house was designed to accommodate my aging needs, with ramps instead of stairs, wide doorways, and grab bars in the bathroom. She had even created a cozy reading nook for me, complete with a comfy armchair and a bookshelf stocked with my favorite novels. Life was good. We had each other, and that was all that mattered. One day, as I was preparing Xenia's favorite meal, I paused, a wave of contentment washing over me. I thought about the journey we had been on, the challenges we had overcome, the unbreakable bond we had forged. Xenia had taught me so much about resilience, about forgiveness, about the enduring power of love. She had shown me that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope, always a reason to keep going. And as I stirred the pot, the aroma of spices filling the air, I realized that I had found my home, not just in this house, but in the heart of my extraordinary granddaughter. We had created a family, a sanctuary built on love and mutual respect, a place where we could both truly be ourselves, and in that moment, I knew that we would be okay. We had weathered the storms, and now the sun was shining brightly on our lives. We had found our happy ending, together. Story 2. This is the tale of how my life completely changed. My name is Riley. Twice, not just once. I guess it's best to start at the beginning. I was born to two wonderful parents, David and Joanna David, in a cozy small-town suburb. My mother was a nurse, and my father was a journalist. We weren't wealthy, but we had everything we needed to be happy. Life was smooth until I reached 15. Then everything changed one night. It was a rainy Friday evening, and my parents were on their way home from a dinner party. I was with my granny watching a ridiculous cartoon when the phone rang. The shudder I had when I heard my grandmother sobbing in the kitchen is something I will always remember. The days that followed were a haze of bewilderment and sadness. My mom had perished instantaneously in a vehicle accident. My dad survived, but he was badly injured. When I eventually saw Dad in the hospital, he looked like a completely different person. His legs were crushed and the doctors told us he would never walk again. "I'm so sorry, sweetie," he whispered as I took his hand. "I'm very sorry." Why he was apologizing was beyond me. It wasn't his fault. Later, I realized he was apologizing for how our lives had changed, for the hard times we'd face, for the mother I had lost, and for the father he thought he could no longer be. But my dad, David, was a lot stronger than he gave himself credit for. He threw himself into his work after leaving the hospital and getting used to using a wheelchair. He dedicated all of his energy to his work as an editor for a major city newspaper, because he had always been a gifted writer. Dad made sure I had everything I needed as I got older. He urged me to live my life as normally as possible, establish friends, and join clubs. But the reality was, I liked spending time with him the most. We watched old movies, debated over books, and he'd help me with my homework whenever I needed it. When it was time for college, Dad demanded I move away to school. "You must broaden your horizons, child," he added. "Don't be concerned about me. I'll be all right." Despite my hesitation, I felt in my heart that he was correct. So I went to the State University of New York and studied accounting. I met Emma there, and she ended up becoming my best friend. I got to know Michael, her cousin. Michael was kind, funny, and he didn't hesitate or flinch when I told him about my dad. In fact, when he eventually met Dad, they hit it off instantly, connecting over their love of old rock music. Michael later told me that you're amazing for everything you've done for your dad, who is amazing. For the first time since my mom's accident, I felt a sense of hope. I might be able to lead a typical life. One day, I hope to have my own family and a life full of love and joy. Life seemed to fall into place after graduation. Michael began working as a long-haul truck driver, and I was hired by a nearby tech company. One chilly autumn evening in the park marked the beginning of our 4-year relationship. He asked me to marry him. I was ecstatic, but I had a requirement. I'm unable to leave my dad, though, Michael. I am necessary to him. I wouldn't have it any other way, Michael responded with a smile. We'll all live together. The 3 of us can fit in your dad's flat, right? We had a small but lovely wedding. Dad insisted on rolling himself down the aisle to give me away. No one in the room was dry-eyed. I felt like I was in a fairy tale as Michael and I stood there, but every fairy tale has its problems, and mine was my sister-in-law, Megan, and my mother-in-law, Haley. I could tell they disapproved of me as soon as I met them. When we first met, Haley asked with a disgusted expression, "So your father is handicapped?" I gently corrected her. "He's impaired." It was clear from the start that winning them over wouldn't be easy, but I was determined to find a way. This was the beginning of my next chapter, and I had no idea what life had in store for us. As I corrected her, I made an effort to remain composed. "He works as an editor." Haley simply smiled dismissively and said, "How nice," before turning to Michael with a critical glance. "Are you certain about this? There are a lot of lovely females from decent homes." Anger and shame both caused my face to flush. But Michael spoke very strongly before I could respond. "Mom, Riley is from a nice family. That isn't altered by her dad's handicap. All that counts is that I adore her." I could still see the disdain in Haley's eyes, even though she fell silent. Megan, her daughter, followed her example, and it was difficult to overlook their mutual coldness. Michael kept his word and moved in with Dad and me after the wedding. We found a nice rhythm in our lives. While Michael was out driving large distances, sometimes for days at a time, I worked at the tax office. We'd enjoy supper together as a family, but if Haley and Megan arrived, everything felt different. They hardly acknowledged Dad's presence, acting as though they owned our house. One time I overheard Haley chatting to Megan. "Michael could have done so much better, which is very unfortunate. He is now forced to live with this daughter and her father, who is disabled. Can you picture the Jeans if they have children?" Despite my anger, I restrained myself for Michael's benefit. I was getting tired of reminding myself to preserve the peace. I finally lost my composure one evening, following yet another uncomfortable visit from Haley and Megan. Michael discovered me crying in our bedroom after I had sobbed there. "Hey, what's wrong?" he said as he put his arms around me. "It's your mother and sister," and I cried. "They despise me. They believe that because of Dad, I am unworthy of you." Michael's expression darkened. "That is absurd. I now consider you and your father to be family. It is their issue, not ours, if they are unable to accept that." His words provided me peace. However, I secretly thought that the tension with Haley and Megan was just getting started. As the months passed, as his trucking business took off, Michael found himself traveling more frequently, occasionally making cross-country trips. I remained busy at the tax office and spent my nights with my dad, who was always there to keep me company, even though I missed him while he was gone. I was helping Dad get ready for bed one cool autumn evening when Michael called. His voice was excited, and I could hear it. "I've been thinking, Riley," he said. "What are your thoughts on purchasing a townhouse? Your dad could spend more time outside and get around more easily in his wheelchair. You might also have a garden, something to occupy your time, while I'm traveling." I thought the concept was fantastic, and when I asked Dad, I put the phone on speaker. His eyes glowed. "I'd like a garden," he said. "And going outdoors would be simpler." In the weeks that followed, a decision was made. We poured ourselves into looking for a house. We finally located the ideal location after much hunting. A large townhouse with a beautiful backyard, wide doorways, and a roll-in shower for Dad. Although taking out a mortgage was frightening, we were able to make ends meet with the help of my job, Michael's income, and the rent from Dad's previous apartment. We moved in on a gorgeous spring Sunday. Dad's expression when he wheeled himself onto our new patio is something I will always remember. "This is ideal, my love." His eyes were cloudy with emotion as he spoke. "Thank you. We made the property seem like home over the course of the following several months. I started a small vegetable garden, and Dad loved spending time outside, soaking up the sun and fresh air. It was quiet, almost perfect. To celebrate, we decided to hold a housewarming party. We invited friends, colleagues, and yes, even Haley and Megan. Until they came fashionably late as usual, the party was fun and vibrant. They strolled in, peering about with thinly veiled jealousy. I made an effort to ignore it, determined to enjoy the day as we toured them about the house. Haley seems to be thinking carefully, weighing each aspect. She smiled mischievously at me as we arrived at the main bedroom. "You know, Riley," she said in a low voice, "Michael and I would feel very comfortable in this room. Would you mind putting her father in a nursing home? I may then take up residence here." Her words hit me like a slap. Stunned, I stood there. I felt a surge of anger. I wanted to yell at her, to let her know that we created this life together and that my dad was my family. But I took a big breath and held my calm. "Haley, my father isn't leaving." Silently but forcefully, I said. "He also calls this place home." Haley's face twisted with annoyance, but I didn't care. I walked out, left her standing there, and joined Michael, who was laughing with Dad in the backyard. I was reminded of what really mattered when I saw them content and at ease. I knew I had my family, even when Haley tried to get in the way, my husband, my father, and a strong, love-filled life without anyone. I couldn't let Haley take that away from me, that I had a slap-like feeling. "I'm sorry," I managed to say, still in amazement. "Oh, don't seem so astonished," Haley answered coldly. "Your dad isn't feeling well. He's not a whole person anymore, is he? All this luxury is not necessary for him. A nursing home would be more than adequate for someone in his condition." Before I had a chance to reply, Haley went directly to the terrace, where her father was having a conversation with some visitors. She seized his wheelchair's handlebars and began pushing him in the direction of the driveway, which horrified me. "Haley." I ran after her and yelled, "If you refuse to go to a nursing home, what are you doing? He can stay outside." She sneered. "I take it you wanted that? For him to be outside?" I was trembling with incredulity and rage. Fortunately, Michael heard the noise and rushed to the scene. As he absorbed the image, his cheeks flushed with rage. "What the devil are you doing, Mom?" he shouted. "Now let go of David's chair." Haley looked shocked. I was surprised by Michael's tone, but I was simply, "Honey, I'd rather not hear it." Michael forcibly interrupted her. "Megan and you must go now." Michael apologized again to my father and to me after they departed. "I'm so sorry," he murmured, his voice trembling. "I didn't know she was going to do that. I apologize sincerely." Dad warmly caressed Michael's hand as he reached out. "Son, it's not your fault," he remarked politely. "Some folks simply don't get it." From that day on, things changed. Haley and Megan kept their distance, which suited me just fine. In order to help pay for a new home, Michael took on additional long-distance routes and concentrated even more on his work. I divided my days between taking care of Dad, running our house, and working at the tax office. Years passed by in a flash. The routine of life became comfortable and predictable. We were a happy little family when Michael was home, but he was frequently away on the road. As his health held steady, Dad liked to spend his days in the garden or at home working on his editing. We seemed to have reached some sort of tranquility for a time. Then I received the call that completely upended my world. I was at work when my phone rang, and I heard a voice I didn't recognize. "This is Highway Patrol Officer Andrew, Mrs. Walker." My heart fell. Indeed, I had a hard time spreading the news. "I regret to notify you that Michael Walker, your spouse, was involved in a serious accident." The remainder of the talk was a haze, though they hardly registered. Phrases like head-on collision and didn't make it wafted through the air. As the truth gradually set in, I recall numbly thanking the officer and hanging up the phone. Michael had left. The next week was a cloud of sadness and bewilderment. As if it were automatic, I went through the steps of organizing the funeral, barely understanding what was happening around me. I finally summoned the bravery to call Haley the day before the funeral. I was certain that I should be the one to inform her of her son's passing, rather than a newspaper. "Hello, Haley," sharp voice responded. It's Riley? Haley. With a quivering voice I spoke. It's about Michael. He's gone. An accident occurred. There was stillness on the other end for a while. Then Haley's voice came again, but this time it was angry. You're to blame, she growled. You made him work so hard driving that truck to pay for your lovely house. My son was slain by you. I was taken aback, unable to comprehend what she had said. Haley, I save it, she snapped. I'm counting on you to give him the finest funeral possible. However, don't count on us for anything. Your bed was prepared by you. Lay in it now. She hung up after saying that. I stood there gazing at the phone, tears flowing down my cheeks. How could she be so cruel? How could she say that I was to blame? I was shocked by what I had just heard. The day of Michael's funeral was chilly and wet, mirroring the weight in my heart. The church was full. Michael had been much liked, and it felt like half the village had come to pay their respects. However, when I turned to glance around, I saw that Megan and Haley were not present. They hadn't even turned up for Michael's burial. People were lining up to offer condolences, but they couldn't be bothered with their own brother and son. Dad grabbed my hand and squeezed it. He said, It's their loss, sweetie. We'll work through this together because we're family. We felt the weight of the day as we made our way home after the ceremony. But as we pulled into our driveway, something seemed strange. The lights were on in the home, which was weird because I was sure I had turned them off before leaving for the church. A terrible feeling fell in my stomach as I parked the car, and Dad and I exchanged worrisome glances. The living room was a mess when we walked in. Some of our possessions were strewn all over the floor, and doors were open. I swiftly strolled around the home, examining each room. My heart is racing. Then I saw that some of Michael's most valuable possessions, which he had received from his grandpa, were missing something important. Items that he treasured. Dad came wheeling around to me. His face lit up with worry. This wasn't your typical break-in, Riley. Silently, he said. Just then, a stunning insight hit me. I recalled Haley's stern remarks from our phone call. Could she have done this out of spite? Before we departed, I was certain that I had turned everything off. I saw the lights were on as we came into the driveway. Did you have any lights on, Dad? I frowned as I asked. He gave a headshake. No, I don't believe that. As we drew closer, I observed activity within the home. My heart started thumping. On the day of Michael's burial, were we being robbed? I hurriedly assisted Dad in getting into his wheelchair and out of the car. My thoughts are racing. Do I need to call the police? However, I recognized the voices as we arrived at the front door. I recognized them, and a shiver went down my spine. Haley and Megan were in our living room, surrounded by boxes and furniture, as I pulled open the door. What the hell is going on here? I made a demand, putting aside my sorrow at this egregious infringement. Haley turned and gave me a phony, pitying grin. We're only helping you pack, Riley, sweetheart. After all, with Michael gone, you simply cannot afford to retain this home. I was flabbergasted, Megan piped in, her voice sickeningly lovely. Don't worry. Return to your father's apartment, please. It's comfy. I could sense my temper rising. Get out, I remarked, my voice low and menacing. Leave my residence immediately. In fact, Haley appeared insulted. Riley, this house is ours now. Michael's entire property does. After all, they were his family. You are like hell. I blew up. Today, where were you? At his funeral. Oh, yes, exactly. You couldn't even bother to show up. Dismissively, Haley waved her hand. We were occupied with planning. Be a nice girl now and begin packing. We're going to get together tomorrow. What I was hearing was unbelievable. Not a single tear had been shed for Michael by these women, had not gone to his funeral at all, and now they were trying to take over our home. I'm going to call the cops. Taking out my phone, I said. Megan and Haley looked at each other anxiously. Obviously, they hadn't anticipated my retaliation. Haley began, Now, Riley. But I interrupted her. No. Before I call the police, you have precisely 15 minutes to leave my house. I call this place home. I purchased it with Michael. You're not entitled to be here. Perhaps it was the fire in my eyes or the resolve in my voice. However, it appeared that Haley and Megan finally recognized when they had gone too far. After gathering their belongings, they departed, but not before Haley sneered at me. "Riley, this isn't over. You will hear from our attorneys." After Michael's funeral, the days were a haze of sadness, worry, and never-ending paperwork. In part to keep myself occupied, and in part to avoid Haley and Megan stealing anything that wasn't theirs, I plunged myself into running Michael's affairs. A week after the funeral, I received a call from a local law firm. As I responded, my pulse raced, fearing that Haley was fulfilling her threat. "Mrs. Walker," a clear professional voice greeted me. "James from James and Partners is here. I'm calling about your late husband's will." I experienced a glimmer of optimism. "His will? I had no idea he had one." "Indeed, ma'am. Mr. Walker came to see us about 5 months ago. He asked us to get in touch with you in case he died." I scheduled an appointment for the next day. My thoughts are racing. Why hadn't Michael mentioned this to me? What was meant by it? I wheeled Dad into Mr. James's office the next morning. The lawyer welcomed us kindly. The corners of his gentle eyes wrinkle. "Mrs. Walker, Mr. David, thank you for coming. I'm terribly sad for your loss." As I said, he opened a file on his desk. "Your husband came to see us to draft as well. He was very clear about his wishes." As Mr. James started reading, I held my breath. "Being of sound mind, I, Michael Walker, now give my beloved wife, Riley Walker, all of my material belongings." Dad's hold on my hand tightened as I gasped. Mr. James said, "This includes our home, my truck, and all our savings. It is my intention that Riley used these riches to care for herself and her father, David. David, whom I have come to love as my own. Even from beyond the dead." Tears fall down my cheeks. "We had Michael looking after us." "There's more," Mr. James remarked gently. He handed me an envelope. "Mr. Walker's hands were trembling as he left you a letter." I started reading once I opened the envelope. "My dearest Riley, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I really apologize for abandoning you and David. Please know that you both are the best thing that ever happened to me. I made this well since I am aware of my sister's and mother's personalities. I needed to make sure that you and David would be safe, but I didn't want to worry you. Riley, I'm confident you'll be resilient. Look out for one another, and never forget that my spirit will always remain with you. Love, always. Michael." By the time I finished reading, I was weeping, squeezing Dad's hand firmly. Knowing exactly what Haley and Megan may try to do, Michael had considered every possible way to keep us safe. Even though he was gone, he had made sure we would be safe. I had a newfound sense of strength that evening. I had the strength to confront whatever could happen and whatever Haley and Megan did next because of Michael's love and preparation. I was certain that I had a strong base and the resolve to stick with it. I would respect Michael's memory by preserving the home we had made together, clinging on the love and family he left me. The final sentences of Michael's letter struck a deep chord with me. "Riley, you and David are my true family, not them. Look out for one another. Live life to the fullest, and know that I'll be keeping an eye on you two at all times. All my love, Michael." I clutched the letter to my chest and started crying, a mixture of thankfulness and agony. As if to comfort me that we will overcome this together, Dad patted my arm while crying into his worn palm. Mr. James paused to allow us to gather our thoughts before continuing. "There's one more item, Mrs. Walker. Due to the accident's conditions, the insurance company will pay out the whole policy amount for your husband's truck." Still sniffling, I looked up, trying to take in what he had said. "What does that signify?" Mr. James smiled slightly, comfortingly. "It indicates that you will get a sizable payment, sufficient to cover your mortgage and other expenses." A burden was removed from my shoulders as we walked out of the attorney's office. Even without him, Michael had ensured our safety. He had considered every possibility. As soon as we entered our driveway, on the street I spotted a car I knew. When I saw Haley's svelte sedan, my heart fell. "Oh no," I mumbled, fearing what may come next. On our front porch, Haley and Megan were indeed waiting. But this time, I wasn't frightened. I had Michael's letter in my pocket, and the strength of his love filling my heart as we approached. The tone of Haley's voice became phonily sweet. "Riley," she said. "We must discuss Michael's estate." I straightened up and looked her in the eye. "Haley, no, we don't. I was left everything by Michael. Everything is official and lawful. Are you curious as to why? Because we, not you, were his true family." I firmly gestured in the direction of the street. "Please go now. You're trespassing on my property." Haley was silent for once. With a final scathing stare, they got into their car and sped off while Megan pulled at her arm and spoke passionately. In the weeks that followed, I was very busy taking care of Michael's affairs. I'm thankful for the diversion from my sorrow. As Mr. James had stated, the insurance payoff came in time to pay off our mortgage and still had money left over. While going through Michael's desk one afternoon, I found a little notepad with his signature handwriting in it. He had jotted down his ideas and aspirations for our future together in this sort of diary. I was inspired to create a college fund for our future children after reading one of the entries. I want to make sure kids get the finest start in life. As I read those lines, my heart tightened. We discussed starting a family eventually, but we had made the decision to put it off until we were in a better financial position. I now experienced a new wave of pain as I read of Michael's personal aspirations. "Oh, Michael," I whispered, holding the notebook close. I couldn't sleep that night since we had so many plans. Haunted by memories and thoughts of the future we would never have, I tossed and turned. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of Michael. He was there, smiling and stretching out his hand to me. "It's okay, Riley," he said softly. In my dream, "Everything's going to be all fine." I felt different when I woke up the next morning. I couldn't exactly understand it, but something in me had moved as I got ready for work. A wave of nausea overtook me, and I barely made it to the restroom in time. I initially believed it was simply the effects of my sadness, but when the morning sickness lingered in the days that followed, a reality began to dawn on me. Could it be? I eventually plucked up the guts to take a pregnancy test after a few days. As I waited for the results, my heart was racing. When the two little lines appeared, I covered my mouth in shock. Overwhelmed with emotion, it was Michael's child that I was carrying. In that instant, everything changed. Knowing that a piece of Michael would live on in our child gave me a profound sense of purpose and serenity. I pictured his smile, his generosity, and his goals continuing through this new life, a gift he had left behind. When I told my father the news, tears flooded his eyes. He grabbed my hand and gave it a firm squeeze. He whispered that Michael would be very proud. "This child will have the best elements of both of you." From then on, I concentrated on constructing a future for my son and honoring Michael's memory in any way I could. I kept his letter and notepad near, a continuous reminder of his love and the life we had planned together. I also understood that I was not alone, even if the path ahead would not be simple. I was being led by Michael's spirit. Our small family would continue, more powerful than before. A tiny voice in the back of my mind hinted that it may be something more than the stress and sadness. After a week of feeling weird, I found myself standing in the drugstore aisle, gazing at the pregnancy tests. My hands were shaking as I picked one up, bought it, and hurried home. It seemed like the longest 5 minutes of my life to wait for the results. Finally, I gazed down to clean blue lines. I sank to the bathroom floor, overwhelmed by a mix of emotions, joy, fear, grief, and hope all swirling together. From outside the door came Riley's father's voice. "Everything okay in there?" I pulled the door open. I'm crying uncontrollably. His face changed from worry to alarm. "What's the matter, dear?" he inquired softly. The test was held up by me. My hands are trembling. "Dad, I'm expecting." Then I sank into his arms, crying. Daddy pulled me close, caressing my hair the way Daddy used to when I was a small child. "It's all right," he whispered. "Everything will work out. Riley, you're not alone. As well as this infant. This infant is a present, a lasting fragment of Michael." His remarks affected me profoundly. Michael was a part of this baby, a continuance of our love. The terror inside me began to diminish, replaced by a resolve I had never experienced before. I wiped my eyes and said, "You're right. We will be all right. And this baby is a gift. Dad grinned, warmth crinkling his eyes. My daughter is that. Let's get you a bite to eat now. After all, you're eating for two now. I started to feel hopeful as we made our way to the kitchen. The path ahead would be tough, but with my father by my side and Michael's kid developing within me, I felt we could face anything. I found a strength I never knew I had as the months went by and my belly grew. Dad turned into my pillar of support. A helpful hand, a shoulder to lean on, or a kind word are always available. We were accustomed to our new routine. We were both excitedly anticipating the birth of this new life, which would complete our small family. Dad and I established a garden together, and one lovely afternoon I was taking care of it. A car pulled up, I heard. When I saw Haley's svelte automobile, my heart fell. What on earth could they desire? With one hand automatically resting on my bulging abdomen, I now strolled to the front of the house. Megan and Haley stood on the porch, looking a little desperate and uneasy. Haley's usual sharpness was missing from her voice as she began. Riley, we need to talk to you. I arched an eyebrow while remaining quiet and awaiting her next move. Next up was Megan, her eyes darting around nervously. We've experienced some hardship. Until we get back on our feet, we wanted to know whether we may stay at her father's former apartment. What I was hearing was unbelievable. They had the audacity to demand more after what they had done to us. I spoke in a firm but calm tone. I apologize, but that isn't feasible. I do not wish to communicate with either of you in the future. Haley's face contorted in disdain and disbelief as her eyes fell to my stomach. Are you expecting a child? Her voice was brimming with accusations as she spat. Already. You're small. It's unbelievable that you've already found another man. You're carrying someone else's child when Michael's body isn't even cold. A wave of rage erupted. However, I swallowed it. I didn't know them, any answers, and I certainly didn't want them engaged in my child's life. I merely flashed a faint, covert grin that appeared to upset Haley even more. You don't need to worry about my private life, I responded calmly. Now I think it's time for you to depart. Haley seemed to want to argue, but she must have been deterred by my face. She turned on her heel, taking Megan's arm, and they both walked away. I watched as they drove off, feeling a profound sense of peace wash over me. I had maintained my dignity, defended my family, and stood my ground. Michael would have been pleased, I knew. Story 3. The rhythm of life in this peaceful Texas suburban area is constant and regular. Karen, a dedicated homemaker, discusses her peaceful living with her husband John and their teenage son Ethan. Their modest but cozy home reflects years of effort and love, with family photos lining the walls and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee often filling the air. It feels like just another day. As Karen cleans the living room while humming to herself, the sun shines through the windows. The familiar buzz of suburban life surrounds her kids playing down the street, lawnmowers droning in the distance. It's a picture of everyday life, and Karen treasures it. The silence is broken by a quick, abrupt knock on the door. Karen pauses, her heart skipping a beat as the sound disrupts her thoughts. 3 stern-looking guys in black suits who identify themselves as FBI agents are waiting for her when she answers the door. They accuse her son Ethan of being engaged in a significant cyber theft and submit what looks to be an official arrest warrant. She is overcome with shock and incredulity as she tries to understand the charge against her son, whom she feels is incapable of committing such a crime. Karen was stunned by what she had just heard and stood still. Your son Ethan is under suspicion for theft. Holding up what seemed to be an arrest warrant, one of the guys in suits said in a matter-of-fact manner. The quoted amount of $700,000 left her gasping for air. Ethan injured Ethan. She was unable to connect these horrible accusations with the picture of her intelligent, kind son. With a shaky voice, she eventually managed to remark, "This must be a mistake. This is not something my son would ever do." The tallest of the males stepped forward. He had a somber countenance. "We have several witnesses, ma'am. The evidence is obvious, and he was spotted close to the crime site. There's no use in denying it." He handed her the paper, which appeared official at first glance, but felt strangely flimsy. Karen's hands shook as she perused the page, though her heart refused to trust any of it. "Impossible," she replied, her voice increasing as her incredulity turned to wrath. "Ethan is bedridden. He hasn't left this residence in weeks while he recovers from a terrible injury." Although she spoke firmly, she felt a twinge of terror as the guys looked at each other with knowing assurance. Another man, speaking in a colder tone, said, "Ma'am, we recognize that this is tough for you, but we have proof that ignoring it would only worsen the situation for everyone." Karen's protective instincts kicked in, and she stepped back. She grabbed the doorknob closer, her mind racing. "This is absurd. I want to see the right paperwork." With a trembling but firm voice, she demanded. The group leader let out a loud sigh. "Ma'am, we're with the FBI. There isn't enough time to go over every aspect. Where is your son now? We have to talk to him." "You won't be entering?" Karen yelled, attempting to close the door, but one of the men pushed it open by sticking his foot in the opening. "Step aside, ma'am." With a commanding authority, he gave the order. "No." Karen, putting herself squarely between them and her house, yelled, "You have no permission to enter in this manner." The men pushed past her despite her cries, and she was unable to defend herself due to their size. Like animals out for prey, they strode into the living room and scanned the area. Karen screamed, "You can't do this!" And they started searching through cupboards and drawers. She attempted to stop them with shaking hands, slamming one door shut when one of the guys attempted to pry it open. With a stern gaze, the leader turned to face her. "You will regret concealing something. I have nothing to conceal." She screamed, a desperate cry replacing her frustration. "Ethan is not guilty. Check it out for yourself. He is not in a fit state to conduct any offense." However, the men turned their attention away from her and toward the corridor that led to Ethan's room. As they got closer to the door, Karen's heart raced. The invaders stormed into Ethan's chamber, drowning out her cries with their thundering footsteps. Karen followed in their wake. Her heart was racing. She couldn't allow them to harass her son, even though she was afraid of what they might do. But the tension in the room changed as soon as they opened the door. A nice blanket was placed over Ethan's legs as he reclined in his motorized hospital bed. A variety of medical devices buzzed faintly next to him: the monitors, the four-stand, and the wheelchair stowed neatly to one side. His condition, which left him paralyzed from the waist down following a catastrophic vehicle accident months ago, was evident in his room. Evidently taken by surprise, the three men came to a halt and gazed at Ethan. Despite their overpowering presence, Ethan remained strangely calm. He gave the man a courteous but forceful grin, while he leaned slightly forward and studied his upper body with his arms. "Good afternoon," Ethan responded calmly and steadily. "I can hear the noise. You're here to arrest me?" After hesitating, the group leader cleared his throat. "We have an arrest warrant for you. You are charged with stealing $700,000 and escaping the crime scene." With a look of light amusement, Ethan cocked his head. As you can see, he pointed to the wheelchair and the medical equipment encircling him. "Feel free to look around. Not that I'm precisely capable of running away. To be honest, I haven't left this room in days, much less stolen anything." Karen watched the guys struggle under Ethan's calm stare, while standing in the doorway with her arms folded tightly across her chest. "I told you," she said sternly. "You wouldn't listen, even if my son is innocent." Clearly shook in confidence, one of the younger males shuffled uneasily. He mumbled, his voice no longer as firm as it had been. We have witnesses." Ethan rested his head on his pillow. His composure was unflinching. "Then those witnesses either have weak eyesight or the incorrect person. How they believe I pulled out a theft and escaped undetected would be interesting to me." As the fictitious cops looked at each other uneasily, the room went quiet. Still clutching the warrant, the leader folded it and placed it in his pocket. He turned to the door and said, "It looks like there was a mistake." "Error." Karen stepped forward and snapped, "You charge my son with a grave offense. You stormed into our house, and now you're simply walking away without even saying sorry." The man tried to go quickly, ignoring her, clearly uncomfortable. "Let's go," mumbled one of them. In uneasy quiet, they left the room and headed for the door. Ethan saw them turn back. His face was a mixture of silent victory and relaxation. "Mom," he whispered. Give them up. They know the truth now. As the fictitious cops vanished down the corridor, Karen looked at Ethan, her relief clashing with her protective instincts. As the fictitious cops turned to go, she felt her tension subside, but the rage still boiled under the surface. The youngest of the three caught Ethan's attention. A recollection was evoked by his stance, his tentative gait, and the way he avoided making eye contact. Hold on, Ethan yelled, his tone stern, yet inquisitive. The man turned slowly to face him when he halted in mid-step. Ethan narrowed his eyes, examining his features more intently. His nose was somewhat crooked, his cheekbones were sharp, and his forehead was wrinkled in agony. Everything came flooding back. Steve? With a hint of astonishment and incredulity in his voice, Ethan inquired. The man's eyes shot to the ground, and his face went pale. Karen, who was standing next to Ethan, gazed at her son bewildered. Steve? Who is Steve? She inquired. Her protective tendencies ebbed. Ethan didn't pay attention to her query. His attention was fixed on the individual in front of him. He was sure that you were Steve Larson. Remember how we played soccer together? You're back in middle school? Steve's hands balled into fists as he gulped hard. With a look of humiliation and remorse on his face, he glanced up at Ethan. He muttered, Ethan. He was hardly able to be heard. As the atmosphere became heated with unsaid emotion, Karen's eyes moved between the two guys. Ethan's tone grew softer. Steve, you were the team's finest forward. You always claimed that one day we will both go pro. What took place? With a trembling breath, Steve finally looked Ethan in the eyes. Bitterly, he muttered, Life happened. We had to relocate after my dad lost his job. I had to give up soccer and concentrate on simply making it through for my family. We just managed to get by. He glanced aside when his voice cracked. Ethan was unable to go on as memories of their relationship returned. Their shared aspirations of greatness, the long hours they spent on the field, and the unexpected day Steve abruptly left. Ethan pointed to Steve's uniform and remarked, That doesn't explain this. Steve's shoulder drooped. He said in a remorseful tone, I didn't want this. There was nothing else I could do to support my family. The interest on my dad's loans continued to rise. These men gave me a route out so I could support my family. I only needed to provide them with information on the residents in our former area. They said that nobody will be harmed. Karen's eyes went wide with surprise, but Ethan seemed unflappable despite his displeasure. And you felt attacking me? Your buddy was the correct approach. Steve dropped to his knees with his head drooping, his poise disintegrating. I was unaware that it was you. With tears running down his cheeks, he spoke. Not until we get here, I swear. It was too late when I realized I had attempted to stop them. When Ethan saw his once promising friend reduced to this Steve, his heart ached. Why didn't you simply ask for assistance? Through his tears, Steve laughed bitterly. I felt too embarrassed. I did not want you to witness my transformation. Karen watched the broken man in front of her, and her anger turned to sadness. Ethan stretched out in spite of his own sense of betrayal. You must put this right, Steve, he replied quietly. Steve shook his voice and said, I will. I'll surrender myself. I'll find a way to fix this. Ethan and Karen looked at one another, the weight of his words still hanging in the room. They felt a mixture of optimism and sadness. Steve knelt on the floor, tears staining his cheeks as he acknowledged his involvement. His voice was shaking as he added, I didn't mean for it to go this far. The strain was simply too much for me to bear any longer. The debts of my father were being crushed by them. If I provided them with information on affluent folks from our former area, these people promised to assist me in repaying it. When the understanding struck, Karen remained still, her arms clenched about her. These individuals had devised their ruthless plan using Steve's despair. She felt both pity and anger, but Ethan's eyes stayed steady, observing this longtime friend with a mix of melancholy and silent comprehension. No one would be harmed, they assured me. Steve kept breaking his voice. They said it was only done to intimidate individuals into making financial contributions. Ethan, I had no idea they would target you. If I had known, I swear. His head hung low as he trailed off. The group leader, who had been standing close to the door, tensed up abruptly. A sneer twisted his face as his eyes narrowed at Steve. He stepped forward and hissed, "You talk too much." Steve flinched as the man grabbed him by the collar, jerking him to his feet. "What are you doing, in your opinion? Leaking your guts in this way. Because you can't keep your mouth quiet. Do you want us all to fail?" "Quit," Karen yelled, coming forward. However, the leader paid little attention to her, concentrating solely on Steve. With a voice full of menace, the man hissed, "You're supposed to keep quiet. Remember the deal we had. You help us, and we help you. But now you're attempting to put us under the bus. You're an idiot." Steve fought against the man's hold, his gaze flitting to Karen and Ethan, a silent cry for assistance. He spat back, "I don't care anymore. I can't keep living like this. They are entitled to the truth." The man's expression darkened, and with a swift motion he threw Steve to the ground. The second imposter, a stockier man, joined in, kicking Steve hard in the ribs. Steve shouted out in anguish, curling into himself as the strikes poured down. "Quit!" Karen shouted, moving forward to interfere, but the stockier man shoved her back, sending her sprawling into the wall. Through the confusion came Ethan's voice. "Leave him alone," he yelled, his tone strong despite his physical limitations. The men paused, then turned to look at Ethan. "This isn't going to work out well for you," Ethan said, his cool exterior belying the rage that was bubbling within. "The actual police will arrive at any moment. You believe that this will enable you to escape?" The commander paused, looking anxiously out the window, as though sirens were about to sound. Even though his companion appeared unsure, he still loomed over Steve. Despite the pain, Steve lifted his head a little and made a feeble addition. "You're finished. I assume you are aware of it." The commander yanked the stockier man back while muttering curses. "We're heading out," he growled suddenly, but just as they turned toward the door, the sound of tires skidding to a halt outside halted them in their tracks. A voice shouted from outside as red and blue light shot through the windows. "The police are here. Put your hands up and go!" Karen's face lit up with relief as she scurried over to join Ethan. As the reality of their predicament sunk in, the fictitious policemen exchanged terrified looks, their bluster disintegrating. Steve attempted a feeble grin, bruised but alive. "I told you it's over." Karen's mind was racing in the midst of the confusion, trying to figure out how to put a stop to this nightmare. She seized her opportunity with shaking hands, while the fictitious police were preoccupied with their intensifying dispute with Steve. With her phone firmly grasped and called, she crept into the corridor. 911. Her voice was low, yet urgent, as she reported the invaders. She said, "There are men in my house who are posing as FBI agents. They are putting my family at danger. Send assistance right now, please." The dispatcher assured her that officers were on their way. Karen ended the call. Her heart was racing as she prepared for what was about to happen. She went back to the living room and stood guardedly next to Ethan, her eyes focused on the still-occupied imposters. Minutes later, the sound of screeching tires and a demanding voice from outside disturbed the tense mood. "The police are here. Put your hands up and go." The fictitious cops froze, their faces becoming white with disbelief. The leader looked toward the window, and his confidence dissolved. Their greatest dread was confirmed by the red and blue lights that flashed. Ethan stated firmly, "It's over." His soothing voice broke the stillness. The door was suddenly opened by the actual cops. Dropped to the ground, weapons drawn, their presence firm and dominating. One of them gave the command. After a moment of hesitation, the imposters complied. They lifted their hands in a gesture of submission. As the fictitious cops were handcuffed and led outside, Karen breathed a nervous sigh of relief, looking over her. The conclusion of the struggle made the room feel lighter. Even still, the consequences of what had transpired continued to weigh heavily. Steve, still sitting on the floor, didn't resist as one of the real officers approached him. "Do you have anything to do with this?" the officer asked. "Yes," Steve answered slowly, his voice laced with remorse. "I'll comply. I am aware that what I did was improper." He gazed at Ethan, his eyes filling with tears. I sincerely apologize for betraying your confidence, Ethan. I will correct this, I swear. Ethan held his gaze for a moment before nodding. Steve, this is still fixable. Simply be truthful and act morally. Steve was assisted in standing up and led away. Karen and Ethan exchanged a quiet, tired gaze. The horror was done, but the echoes of the day's events would remain for a long time. Though the memories of that horrific day persisted, Karen and Ethan gradually put their lives back together in the days that followed the traumatic experience. The elaborate plan of the imposters, who had targeted wealthy families in the area, was clarified by the legitimate authorities. Armed with costumes and fictitious warrants, the men had pretended to be FBI agents and used intimidation and fear to extract substantial sums of money. The group's leader had been planning these atrocities for months, taking advantage of weaker families who would stop at nothing to keep their loved ones safe. The thought of how close they had been to becoming victims made Karen shudder. Steve, however, proved an unexpected catalyst in bringing the conspiracy to an end. After his arrest, he openly confessed to his role and supplied critical information that led to the conviction of his accomplices. He acknowledged that he had scouted the family and gave information about their residences and daily schedules. Despite the fact that his activities were clearly wrong, he received a lenient sentence because of his cooperation and readiness to testify. While Karen remained cautious, the authorities provided her and Ethan with updates regarding Steve's case. She was astonished by Ethan's unflinching kindness. One evening, while they spoke about what had happened, Steve admitted that he had made mistakes. He's not a horrible person, though. He was trapped by circumstances and bad decisions. I think he can change his life if he's prepared to make amends. Karen sighed, unsure if she could share her son's faith in his old friend. But Ethan's optimism was infectious, and she couldn't help but admire his capacity for forgiveness. A few weeks later, Ethan received a letter from Steve. In it, Steve conveyed his great apologies and thanks for Ethan's understanding. He promised to put his life back together and atone for the suffering he had brought about. As he read the letter, Ethan grinned, his conviction in Steve's salvation reaffirmed. Karen observed her son placing the letter on his bedside table after carefully folding it. Despite everything, he remained hopeful, a trait she found remarkable as she looked at him. She realized that while the day had brought fear and betrayal, it had also shown her the strength of her son's character. It was a lesson in resilience, forgiveness, and the possibility of redemption, even at the worst moments. The days after the ordeal were a blend of introspection and regeneration for Karen and Ethan. Despite the terrifying event, a silent will to go on was left behind. Ethan, particularly, appeared more resolute than ever. Karen discovered Ethan watching videos on his tablet one evening while she was bringing dinner to his room. She peeked over his shoulder and watched video of power chair soccer matches. Thinking about giving it a try? With a hint of wonder in her voice, she inquired. With a gleam of enthusiasm in his eyes, Ethan grinned. Why not? I've lain here feeling sorry for myself long enough. If my playing isn't as good as it once was, I'll figure something out. As Ethan started playing wheelchair soccer, Karen was filled with joy. With the same fervor he had previously shown for ordinary soccer, he immersed himself into the game, training non-stop in his customized wheelchair. His tenacity was contagious and gave the home a fresh feeling of direction. Steve's letters, filled with remorse and a desire to make amends, started to come in the meantime. In his first letter, Steve apologized profusely, explaining his actions and the desperate circumstances that had led him astray. He expressed gratitude for Ethan's forgiveness and vowed to turn his life around. I realize I don't deserve a second opportunity, one letter read, but I want you to know that your confidence in me means everything. I'll put in a lot of effort to become someone you can be pleased with, and let's play soccer one more when I go. I'll find a way to stay up with you no matter what. As he read the letters, Ethan grinned, his belief in Steve's redemption unwavering. In his reply, he urged Steve to persevere and said they would cross paths on the field eventually. Notwithstanding the challenges, Karen was motivated by her son's optimism and fortitude. A quiet resolve replaced the helplessness and fear she had experienced during the incident. Life was unpredictable, but she realized she had the strength to face its challenges as Ethan practiced in the yard. Karen felt hope return to her heart as laughter filled the room. Although the road ahead would not be simple, she was confident that they would advance together more powerfully than before because of her son's unfailing spirit. The yard's peaceful suburban neighborhood was bathed in a warm golden glow as the sun sank below the horizon. With a soccer ball at his feet, Ethan sat in his power chair. With every turn and pass, his practice motions had become more assured, demonstrating his tenacity and resolve. Karen looked from the porch, a soft grin on her face as she saw the spark of delight in her son's eyes. Despite everything they had gone through, the dread, the treachery, and the uncertainty, Ethan's spirit had stayed intact. He had found a way to channel his pain into something positive, transforming his passion for soccer into a new interest that gave him direction. Inside the house, a letter from Steve sat open on the kitchen table. Steve wrote about his efforts to make apologies, including his goals for the future and his complete cooperation with the authorities. He assured Ethan that one day they would play soccer together again, a pledge that rang strongly with the two of them. As the evening air carried the aroma of freshly cut grass, Ethan gazed toward the porch. His face lit with a hopeful smile. With a steady, confident voice, he said, "We're going to be okay, Mom." Karen nodded, her heart bursting with joy. In that moment, she saw the true power of the human spirit, the ability to find light even in the darkest moments. They would confront whatever was ahead together, more unified and powerful than before. Story 4. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "I really don't like the way you're acting," Huxley, the executive vice president, said sharply. "You must choose, be let go from the firm or degraded." His words hit me like a truck. As he went on with his tirade, I stood there dumbfounded. This was no ordinary day. It was the day before a crucial business transaction reached its conclusion, a deal I had been guiding from the outset. Suddenly, Huxley insisted on replacing me as the principal negotiator. I didn't know what was causing the sudden outburst. He had never behaved in such a manner. "What's wrong with this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. His remark made everything plain. "This is your fault," he snapped. "You're getting penalized for exceeding me." It was there. Huxley, who was the same age as myself, unable to cope with my achievements. It has nothing to do with the business or the discussion. It was intimate. He didn't want me to succeed, not in a position he believed he deserved, in particular. It was unbelievable to me. I had worked hard, poured my energies into this position, and now my superior was trying to take my successes away. I didn't want to work for a corporation like this. What was the point of my labor if it only resulted in sabotage and jealousy? "I'm finished," I spoke firmly. "I'll resign. You have the entire negotiation tomorrow." The executive vice president. With that, I turned and walked out of the conference room, leaving Huxley to deal with the mess he created the next day. President Riker, who was also Huxley's father, entered the room just before the negotiation started. He appeared perplexed. "Where's Emery?" he inquired. This negotiation was meant to be his. Huxley, looking smug, responded, "I fired him yesterday." Riker's face transformed in an instant. His perplexity grew into wrath as he glanced at his kid. "You what? You fired him, but why?" he made a demand. Huxley attempted to defend himself, obviously unprepared by this response. "I thought I could handle it better," he said confidently. Riker, however, didn't believe it. "Have you looked over the negotiation materials at all?" he inquired. Huxley's face flashed panic as he reached for the papers. His confidence dissolved as he glanced at them. He had missed a critical detail, and it showed. His face became white. "I'm 38 years old, and my name is Emery. My career has been an interesting journey. I've had 3 job changes, none of which were due to layoffs or business closures. My motivations were more personal. However, I usually explained that it was for professional advancement. That was just more convenient." Without further investigation, the majority of employers accepted this explanation. But something unexpected occurred during my fourth interview for a job. The Vice President Nixon saw straight through me. "That's not the true reason, is it?" He looked right at me as he asked. "You don't appear like someone who switches professions solely for professional growth. And if that were the case, you'd be aiming higher. Our firm and your last one are around the same size. So what's the true stories?" Caught off surprise, I realized honesty was my best option. I shrugged and told him the truth. I was surprised when Nixon paid close attention and nodded when I described my predicament. "I got it," he added with a smile after I was done. "I understand why you didn't want to say that up front. Don't worry, I'll take care of it." I wasn't sure if I had come across as confident when I left the interview. I was shocked to receive an email a few days later. They wanted to recruit me as the new sales manager, not for the supervisory role I had sought for. Perplexed, I phoned to explain. "There must be a mistake," I said. "I applied for another position." Nixon chuckled. "No error," he said. "Your expertise makes you the ideal candidate for our current sales manager's upcoming retirement. The role of a manager is to guide, not to follow. You know that, don't you?" His statements made sense, and I accepted the offer. When I joined the firm, I instantly observed something peculiar. I wasn't bothered by the fact that the majority of my co-workers were far younger than me. In fact, I found it refreshing. My younger colleagues valued my open-minded leadership approach and contributed new ideas and enthusiasm. But not everybody was content. Huxley, the executive vice president, appeared to have an issue with me. I wasn't sure why at first, but once the former sales manager retired and I took over the position formally, it became evident. Huxley began criticizing everything that I did. Huxley publicly chastised me one day after I turned in a monthly business report to the senior team. He yelled in a meeting, "You should have gotten my approval first." The other executives appeared perplexed. I had always provided accurate and comprehensive reports. "Are you frustrated?" I inquired about Huxley's meaning. "To which instructions do you mean?" calmly asked. He lost it at that point. He launched into a tirade of grievances, saying I had gone too far. It was obvious that Huxley disliked my initiative. But instead of focusing on what was best for the firm, he turned it personal. And that's how he got himself here, with Huxley attempting to undermine me just because he couldn't take my success. "This is a new position for you." Huxley gave me a patronizing warning. "You're like an inexperienced driver. Prior to making any choices, check with me or the other executives first." His remarks were painful. It was demeaning and untrue to compare my experience to that of a novice driver. I was confident in my skills because I had years of experience. As I stood there trying to figure out how to respond, Nixon, the vice president, stepped in to defend me. He moved the conversation along deftly. He had complete support for this position from Emery's predecessor, the former sales manager. "Firmly," Nixon said. "Additionally, the sales team has stated that they find him easier to collaborate with. He has already had a beneficial effect." The other executives nodded in agreement when they heard this. They appeared persuaded by Nixon's arguments, but President Riker appeared dissatisfied. He turned to his son, Huxley, and chastised him for his needless tirade. "Talented people can't perform well if they're constantly second-guessed," Riker said firmly. Then looking at me, he added, "From now on, the sales department will handle all negotiations directly." Emery appears prepared to assume this duty. Despite my relief at the support, it was obvious that Huxley wasn't pleased with the result. His face was a picture of frustration. Over the next 2 weeks, his rage developed into subtle acts of disturbance. Small but major hurdles started sprouting up across the department. Little things were involved at first. Negotiation samples were sent late. Promotional materials went lost, or other departments delayed their help. By identifying alternatives, such as using different samples or making improvised solutions, my team and I were able to get around these problems. However, the issues persisted. Indeed, they appeared to become more regular and intentional. I kept thinking that Huxley was responsible for everything. Although each department had its own managers, they all blindly followed Huxley's directions when he gave them instructions like putting other orders ahead of ours or postponing our requests. Although I couldn't hold them solely responsible for obeying directions from superiors, it would have been beneficial if they had at least notified my staff beforehand. Then, it became evident that we were dealing with sabotage when something happened. We had arranged a hotel conference room for a crucial negotiation, but at the last minute, the reservation was abruptly canceled. The hotel informed us that someone from our company had called and canceled it when we called to inquire about what had happened. It didn't take me long to figure out who was to blame. Huxley was the only one with the purpose and the resources to do anything like this. I had to face him, I knew. Ignoring his actions would only make matters worse. Determined to find the truth, I gathered all the evidence and entered his office. Huxley played innocent, as was to be anticipated. He shrugged and replied, "I don't know what you're talking about. It must have been a mistake on your team's end." However, his story didn't make sense. With the facts in front of him, the abrupt cancellation, the small number of individuals who were aware of the reservation, and the finance department's affiliation with Huxley, all led clearly to him. Huxley became quiet. He was unable to provide a strong defense for his involvement. Notwithstanding my desire to escalate the matter, I had to focus on the bigger picture. The success of the business and our department depended on the outcome of the negotiation. Bringing up a public dispute with Huxley might endanger our client's confidence. I spoke to him forcefully instead. "This is too crucial a negotiation. If you continue to meddle, I will be forced to bring this up with President Riker. I can support myself with recorded evidence." Huxley gave me a scowl but said nothing. He seems to have backed down for the time being. I still had a hunch that he wasn't finished stirring up trouble. As I had feared, Huxley made his boldest move yet at the worst possible time. Even though I was in charge of the negotiator, he attempted to take over once again. His actions generated pandemonium, and my staff had to work harder than ever to keep everything on track. Despite the obstacles Huxley created, I was resolved not to let his involvement ruin everything. This agreement was too essential to the firm and my staff. I concentrated on leading my staff through the hurdles, ensuring we kept professional and productive. Even though Huxley had attempted to undermine me, I was aware that if I remained strong and concentrated on my work, everyone, including President Riker, would ultimately learn about his actions. Ultimately, individuals like Huxley can erect short-term barriers, but they cannot prevent someone who is driven to achieve. Knowing that we could overcome any obstacle as a team, my team and I were prepared to take on whatever lay ahead. The abrupt cancellation of the hotel room was one of the many challenges we had previously surmounted, and the discussion was finally coming to an end. It appeared like the senior executives would finalize the deal the next day, but Huxley called me into his office early that morning. "I cannot trust you with this important negotiation," he said with a smug look. "From here, I'll take control. You shouldn't be concerned about it." I was confused and taken aback. "I don't get it," I said, attempting to sound calm. "What's the matter?" Huxley scowled in a contemptuous tone. "That's the problem. Why are you unable to just do what your employer says? You may choose. Take a demotion or lose your job. You are no longer needed for this position." I was dumbfounded by what he said. Tomorrow was the final round of the discussions, something I had worked relentlessly on from the very beginning. It was shocking that he would suddenly jump in and take control. I was surprised by Huxley's passionate and violent reaction. Huxley went on, sneering as his face changed to one that was almost delighted as I stood there trying to take in what he had said. "You're getting in trouble for surpassing me." His jealousy was shown there. My triumph was too much for Huxley, who was my age. All along, he had been subtly undermining my efforts. He chose to be outspoken when I remained mute, though, because I was about to close the sale. It appeared to please Huxley. "You were becoming conceited," he said, leaning back in his chair with a smug smile. "You know, just because you can speak English, you have worked for 3 different trading companies according to your resume. But you know what? There are many people here who speak English as fluently as you do." As the head of human resources, it was easy to determine how he obtained my CV, was under his control. Huxley must have pressured them into showing him my personal details, but his reasoning was absurd. "What are you trying to say?" Despite my mounting annoyance, I asked in a calm voice. Huxley laughed, obviously enjoying his own reasoning. "I can speak English proficiently too, so we don't need your involvement in tomorrow's negotiations." His misconception that my business English skills were the key to the negotiation success was laughable. He was unaware of how much more was required to close a deal this size. Still, I didn't feel the need to correct him. If he wanted to take over, so be it. I had no desire to stay in a company where hard work and accomplishments were overshadowed by petty jealousy and sabotage. I'm finished. I spoke firmly. I have no attachment to a corporation when my bosses take credit for my work. You have the entire negotiation tomorrow, EVP. Without waiting for an answer, I turned and marched out of the meeting room seething. I went to pack my things in the sales section, determined to leave this toxic environment behind. On my way, I ran into Nixon. He quickly sensed something was awry. "You seem distressed," he said, worried. "What happened?" Nixon brought me to his office and I decided to tell him everything. I explained all of Huxley's actions, from his recurrent sabotage to his last attempt to take over the discussions. I even brought up the earlier instances, such as the hotel reservation cancellation. Nixon paid close attention as I talked, his face growing more serious with every detail. When I finished, he closed his eyes and seemed lost in thought for a moment. I readied myself expecting him to belittle my concerns, but when he finally spoke, his tone was thick with fury. "Once again, EVP Huxley has done it." "Once more." Confused, I asked. Nixon did not directly respond to me. Instead, he said, "Did you observe anything strange in the executive meetings?" I considered it for a while. Except for me, that is. "There weren't any other persons near my age at those meetings," I added. I initially assumed it was because older people typically fill those roles. But now that I think about it, even for a mid-sized trading company, it's strange. Surely there are talented younger staff who should be part of those talks. Nixon gave a slow nod, his expression bleak. "That's right. Huxley has a tendency to exclude younger individuals and talent from those gatherings. Let me explain why." According to Nixon, Huxley had joined the company about 5 years ago after his previous employer went out of business. It wasn't merit that brought him here. It was a favor. The president's ex-wife had asked Huxley be given a position, so he grudgingly took him on board. Since then, Huxley had been utilizing his position to strengthen his control. Now that the president has remarried, Huxley realizes his position is even more perilous. Nixon claimed he feels threatened by younger, more capable staff, which is why he's been methodically keeping them out of leadership jobs. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So that's why he's been targeting me?" I inquired. Nixon offered a sour grin. "It's not just you. Huxley has no real trading experience and came from a completely different industry. His only advantage is that he looks young. His age is frequently underestimated. Before you joined, he made sure no one who could oppose him got too close to power." Hearing this made everything click. Huxley's actions weren't just about me. They belonged to a wider pattern of manipulation and insecurity. It explained why he had gone to such lengths to sabotage me. But it also made me realize something important. His fear of being outshined wasn't my problem. It was his Nixon. Nixon understood my choice and nodded. "I'll take this up with the president. Huxley won't continue to get away with this." As I left Nixon's office, I felt a mix of frustration and relief. Frustration that I had to leave behind a career I had worked so hard for, but relief that I wouldn't have to deal with Huxley's toxic conduct longer. My focus now is on moving forward and finding a place where my efforts would be valued. Huxley frequently made audacious claims about how he would appeal to younger workers, but he never really supported them with data. The seasoned executives, nevertheless, paid attention, presuming he was knowledgeable. Over time, it became evident that having peers of his age or younger around him undermined his status. Instead of strengthening his talents or acquiring certificates via training, Huxley chose the simpler road, killing his opponents. He assumed that by eliminating others, his ideas would carry more weight and he would have less competition. Employees in their late 25 and 35s, particularly those in supervisory roles, became his main targets. Any discernible actions or accomplishments on their side were met with intimidation, unfounded allegations, or other means of expulsion. Those who value their tranquility in jobs often resigned to leave the harsh work environment. This left the company with only two types of employees: the older, well-established president and fresh-faced younger staff who were just starting their careers. Now, I understood Huxley's actions more clearly. He wasn't just a toxic colleague, he was a manipulative office bully. His major objective, even at the expense of others, was to preserve his reputation as the room's youngest and most competent CEO. To him, it was unthinkable. After all, the president had built the company from the ground up. Transform it into a competitive contender in the business. He found it incomprehensible that someone like Huxley would put outward appearances of youth and importance over true self-assurance. But I knew better. I had seen firsthand what occurs when such conduct is left unchecked. Jealousy and sabotage had gone unnoticed at one of my previous jobs until it was too late, and the business failed. I felt it was time to approach Nixon personally, Executive Vice President Nixon. I started, "What objectives do you have for this business?" Nixon appeared perplexed by my unexpected inquiry. "My objectives? Well, I'm hoping we can continue to boost our earnings. The president's successor is also very capable, even though he's still a student," he replied. His tone appeared to indicate that he hoped I would overlook Huxley's conduct and avoid stirring any controversy. It was evident that Nixon, who had been with the company for a long time, preferred stability to conflict, but I couldn't ignore the problem. Taking a deep breath, I revealed something I hadn't mentioned to anyone before, not even during my job interview. "Do you know why I've changed jobs 3 times?" I inquired. Nixon gave a nod. "Yes. You mentioned being forced out due to jealousy. Well, that's unfortunate. We're fortunate to have someone with your level of talent." I gave a headshake. "But that's just one side of the story," I said. "In actuality, those 3 businesses have ceased operations. They've either split, dissolved, or gone bankrupt. They are no longer in operation." Nixon's face changed from composed to astonished. "That can't be true," he said. "Those businesses were doing very well when we conducted a background check. If you don't believe me, I encourage you to check their websites now." I suggested Nixon take out his smartphone and began looking. With each passing moment, his face grew more and more alarmed. "You're absolutely right," he said quietly. "But how could this have happened?" "It's simple," I explained. "The people who drove me out became more confident and started repeating their actions with others. When a cycle like that continues, it kills a corporation from the inside. A firm cannot function without its people. If employees lose trust and start leaving, the company will eventually collapse." Nixon's countenance got serious as he pondered my statements. I said, "If this matter with Huxley isn't solved, this firm might meet the same fate. Huxley's harassment may seem tiny compared to what I've faced in the past, but it's becoming a big concern. He's already pushed me to choose between being demoted or losing my job. If I resign, it will only encourage him to repeat this behavior with others." After a long silence, Nixon finally nodded firmly. "I understand your perspective now," he said. "This isn't just workplace drama. Jealousy-driven sabotage of the business is a severe problem, and I will not tolerate it anymore." I felt a sense of relief with Nixon on my side. There was now hope for change. I went to HR to get the resignation documents I had previously prepared after talking with him about the next course of action. Just as I was leaving, President Riker came, looking bewildered. "What's happening?" he inquired. Huxley, standing boldly alongside him, declared, "I've already taken care of the negotiation. Emery won't be involved." "What are you saying?" Riker narrowed his eyes and asked. "Emery was meant to handle this." "Why isn't he involved?" "I fired him yesterday," Huxley said with a smug smile. "It's fine. I'm capable of managing it. The only thing left to do is sign the contract, and I can communicate in English." Riker's face became cold. "Have you looked over the negotiating documents at all?" Sharply, he asked. "The executives from the other firm are arriving today. How do you plan to manage this without Emery's?" Huxley, who had imagined the negotiation was only a formality, in a sudden panic, he snatched up the papers and started hastily going through them. When he discovered a crucial detail he had missed, his face went white. The contract wasn't written in English. It was in Arabic, the official language of the Middle Eastern company we were dealing with. An hour before the negotiation, I received a panicked phone from Huxley. "Emery, we need you at the hotel right now," he pleaded. I giggled quietly. "Huxley, This is completely different from what you stated yesterday. Didn't you declare you didn't need me? I didn't realize the contract was in Arabic, he muttered, his voice unsteady. Well, I replied, if you had read the documents earlier, you would have known that. I ended the call and let him handle the mess he had made. Some things, I believed, are learnt the hard way. Many people couldn't overcome the challenges in our negotiation process, but I had a unique advantage. I stood out because I could bargain in Arabic with ease. Speaking 7 languages was one of my skills, and delivering a joke in Arabic to lighten the situation was as simple as breathing. It would be disastrous if the discussions moved to Arabic, and the executives who relied on us were only able to discuss the subject in English. The agreement would collapse because they would feel insulted. Huxley's claim of ignorance was not an excuse because all conditions were spelt out in detail in the paperwork. His desperation was obvious when he started accusing me of fraud, claiming I had hidden my skills by not listing all of them on my resume. I couldn't help but chuckle. Fraudulent employment. Really? I answered, not stating every qualification isn't fraud. Besides, I never claimed I could only speak English. Huxley's voice became bitter. If I had that skill, I'd brag about it, he said bitterly. That is how we vary from one another. I responded calmly. I don't need to boast about my talents. No time to brood over Huxley's jealousy. I knew the agreement would collapse if things went on as they were, so the negotiation was crucial. Clearly out of his element, Huxley began to growl in exasperation. Seeing an opportunity, he became so enraged that he vowed to resign and inform his father, the president of the firm. I gave him encouragement. Why don't you call your father now? Put him on the speaker and tell him why you attempted to cut me out of the discussion. Huxley hesitated, but finally did as I recommended. The instant he started speaking, I knew I had won. I could already see the result of his obvious desperation. The bargain was mine to keep by the time I got to the motel, 10 minutes late. Amusingly, Huxley had memorized an Arabic saying, "Emery will be here soon," and kept repeating it to delay for time. Nixon had foreseen this problem and had booked me a room on another level, instructing me to arrive slightly late to teach Huxley a lesson. I tried to diffuse the tension by using humor when I joined the negotiation. The conversation flowed more easily after I made a joke about how Arabs and Americans manage their time differently. The contract was essentially signed after the atmosphere calmed down. As I saw for visitors, I let out a long sigh, relieved. The business was safe, and the deal went well. Exhausted from the tension, Huxley, who had been sitting motionless in the corner, sagged into a chair. President Riker apologized for Huxley's actions and thanked me for filling in. He will be subject to disciplinary action from us. Firmly, Riker said. Under his father's scowl, Huxley said nothing. Riker fulfilled his promise back at the office. I took you in when you had nowhere else to go, and this is how you reward me? Riker chastised Huxley in front of the executive team. It's like getting bitten by my own dog. Write your resignation letter today. Until you find another work, you can remain. But you will lose your job if you don't comply. You gave Emery the same option without any issues, Huxley. He promptly consented to resign, trembling under the weight of his father's rage. While his resignation was processed instantly, I found it difficult to maintain a straight face while he hurried to air. Riker spoke to the whole team during the next week's morning meeting. He described Huxley's wrongdoing in detail and threatened to punish everyone who had assisted him in his sabotage. Under investigation, those who had dutifully obeyed Huxley's commands were either demoted to inferior positions or quit. The company also adjusted its hiring practices, bringing in more experienced employees in their 25s and 35s. This positive shift allowed younger staff who had previously felt stifled to thrive. The corporation was revitalized when Huxley was removed from the equation. However, Huxley himself struggled to find another work, confronting the long-term ramifications of his conduct. Later, Riker asked me something that had been on his mind. Why? For me, it hasn't always been an advantage. It's been more of a hindrance. When I was younger, I was interested about languages and became proficient in 7 by the time I completed college. Using the expertise was part of my first employment, but it ultimately limited my options. Even when I wanted to participate more actively in negotiations, I was limited to interpretation and translation duties. Despite understanding how to enhance negotiations, I wasn't permitted to speak my ideas. My superiors rejected my request for a promotion to a more involved position, claiming that an interpreter only needs a working mouth and not intelligence. My coworkers misunderstood my role and resented me, thinking I was receiving special treatment. I walked out, frustrated. At my subsequent 2 jobs, I repeated this process. My linguistic talents made me useful, but they also brought jealousy and anger. By the time I got to this organization, I made the decision to minimize my language skills in the interview. It was Nixon who saw through me and understood my potential. Riker thought over my narrative and nodded. I see now why it was so important to address Huxley's actions. We appreciate your patience and assistance in identifying these problems. The business flourished after Huxley left. Riker kept his promise to repay my efforts. The following year, he advanced to the role of chairman, and Nixon became the new president. I was also promoted, rising from sales manager to executive vice president. Despite the promotion, I remained involved in managing the sales department, ensuring our team stayed strong and innovative. My current priorities are cultivating trustworthy subordinates and fostering an atmosphere that encourages the growth of a variety of skills. I utilize my linguistic talents not simply for convenience, but to establish bridges across cultures and increase our reach. I genuinely think that persons in leadership positions have a duty to develop talent, and I use this approach in my everyday work. Story 5. Willow Hart sneered at me when I announced my resignation. I stayed calm, keeping my gaze steady and quiet. The conversation had been about the company's choice to cut labor costs, and Willow seemed to enjoy blaming those who took advantage of overtime pay. Camden Brooks, her little shadow, seemed just as excited about cutting expenses. A week later, my phone rang non-stop with calls from the company. When I finally answered, the president sharply asked, "Who exactly are you?" I couldn't help it. I laughed. I introduced myself as Harper Quinn, a 57-year-old employee with 35 years of loyal service since graduating college. I explained how our company provided administrative services, especially for busy presidents of other companies, helping them with clerical tasks and handling tax-related matters. I was proud to say I managed 40 clients. However, despite having a part-time helper, the workload had become overwhelming. But I couldn't show weakness. My clients had relied on me for years, and their struggles pushed me to keep going. Today, as I sat at my computer, Camden and Willow's constant harassment was on my mind. Camden, who was 7 years younger than me and now head of the tax department, had completely changed after his promotion 3 months ago. His once polite attitude had turned rude, and he often complained, making every interaction difficult. Even when I tried to stand up for myself, he didn't care and would just tell me to follow the manual, warning me not to take unnecessary steps. Willow, who worked as Camden's assistant, also joined in the bullying. She criticized my work efficiency and made fun of my position, even though I had turned down the chance to become the department head, a fact neither of them knew. I continued doing my job, but the harassment didn't stop. Camden accused me of working too much overtime, saying it was wasteful, and Willow would sigh and agree, claiming that my overtime was hurting the whole department's performance. The real reason for my overtime was that Camden had dumped a month's worth of client files on my desk, telling me they had to be done by the end of the month. After work, I looked at the pile of files, feeling exhausted. Wait, all these have deadlines this month? I asked myself in confusion. But before I could fully process the situation, Camden was already packing up his desk, uninterested in my concerns. "I'm heading out." "Good luck with that," he said casually as he left the office, leaving me with an overwhelming amount of work. Willow soon followed, adding to my frustration with a mocking laugh. As I sat there, I realized that some of the files had been Willow's responsibility. That's when it hit me. Camden and Willow were trying to push me into retiring. My extensive experience and deep knowledge of taxation made me a valuable resource for the rest of the department, even more than Camden. His unfriendly attitude and unattractive personality made people avoid him, except for Willow, who seemed to stay close to him for strategic reasons. It was clear that Willow was trying to impress Camden, and her harassment wasn't just personal. She wanted to win his favor, as he was the one evaluating the department's performance. Despite the challenges, I had to keep working, balancing my regular tasks with preparing tax declarations for my clients. The workload seemed endless, but I knew if I claimed overtime, Camden and Willow would complain even more. So I resigned myself to working extra hours without pay. Then, unexpectedly, I was called to the president's office. Our company had recently gotten a new president after the former president became ill. The new president, his son, didn't know much about the company yet. When I walked into the office, I saw Camden and Willow smirking at me. The atmosphere was tense as the president dropped a bombshell. "Harper, we need you to resign by the end of the month." My head spun. I asked for more information, and it turned out that Camden and Willow had accused me of overbilling for overtime. While others had around 15 hours of overtime, they claimed I had worked over 60. The president, unaware of the real situation, seemed impressed by Camden and Willow's zero overtime record. It was then that the truth hit me. The extra overtime was because I had been doing both Camden and Willow's work. But if I told the president that, it might look like I couldn't manage my time properly. I calmly explained the situation, stating that I hadn't overbilled for overtime, but had simply struggled to finish the massive workload within regular hours. The president sighed deeply, unsure of what to do. He doubted my story but admitted there wasn't enough evidence to take action against me. Even so, the weight of their accusations hung heavily in the air. He insisted that they couldn't keep someone who worked at such a slow pace. Resigned to the situation, it was clear the president had made up his mind. He suggested I resign, and there wasn't much left for me to argue. After dedicating 35 years of my life to the company, I was being asked to leave. A deep weariness washed over me. Despite all my hard work, especially the extra tasks dumped on me by Camden and Willow, none of it seemed to matter. I agreed to leave at the end of the month, reminding the president that I had already informed him of my intention to resign. As I glanced at Camden and Willow, their smug smiles told me they were more than satisfied with the outcome. Willow, with her usual sarcasm, taunted me as I left the president's office, saying, "Thanks for quitting." Her words cut through me, but I kept silent, responding with just a steady gaze. Camden also made his approval clear, gleefully talking about how happy he was to cut labor costs. He even went as far as to label me someone who exploited overtime pay. As they chatted excitedly, I began thinking about the handover process. I needed to organize documents for all my clients and make sure everything was in order before I left. I personally said goodbye to as many clients as I could, ensuring appointments were set up, where possible, for those I couldn't meet. I sent letters to let them know who their new point of contact would be. A week after my resignation, I was enjoying some quiet time at home when my phone rang. Seeing the company's number on the screen, I hesitated. I had already completed all my paperwork, including social insurance procedures, so I didn't see a reason to answer. However, after receiving several calls from both the company and Camden and Willow's personal phones, I reluctantly picked up. The president's urgent voice came through the line. "Who exactly are you?" he asked again. I couldn't help but chuckle and replied, "Just an unemployed woman who resigned, that's all." His tone became even more anxious as he explained the chaos that had erupted since I left. 40 clients have called to stop doing business with us," he revealed, his panic evident. He practically begged for me to come back, saying everything had fallen apart. Sighing, I stood up and made my way back to the company. When I arrived, I saw Camden and Willow waiting for me. They looked exhausted, with dark circles under their eyes and a noticeable change in their appearance. It surprised me, and I asked what was going on. Camden glared at me and said angrily, "Since you left, we've been flooded with calls. Clients are canceling transactions, not just yours, but also from companies we were planning to work with. What did you do?" Willow, looking equally frustrated, echoed his accusation. Her weary appearance showed how much the situation had taken a toll on her. Both of them suspected I had done something underhanded to cause all the cancellations. I hadn't done anything wrong, but I had a feeling I knew why the clients were leaving. Thinking out loud, I mumbled my thoughts. Camden, however, wasn't satisfied with my explanation. He outright accused me of orchestrating the chaos and demanded I go with him to the president's office immediately. Without waiting for my agreement, he practically dragged me there. As we entered the office, Camden declared, "President, I've brought her," with a sense of authority, while Willow followed closely behind. Ignoring their harsh tone, the president turned to me and asked about the sudden stop in transactions after my departure. I took a deep breath and explained, "Our clients don't need us to manage their taxes. There are plenty of accounting firms that offer cheaper services. The only reason they stayed with us was because of me." Camden, annoyed, shot back, "Who do you think you are?" Willow sneered as well, questioning my worth to the company. But I stayed calm and continued explaining that I had always offered personalized tax-saving strategies, which made my clients stick with us. It wasn't just about doing the job, it was about offering them something valuable. Camden dismissed my approach as inefficient, arguing that their manual, by-the-book methods were better. The president sighed deeply, recognizing that Camden and I had very different ways of doing things. He looked serious as he said, "Actually," his tone signaled that something important was about to be revealed. "I received a surprising call from my father, the former president," he began. "It turns out that some of the clients who canceled came directly to him to negotiate, asking if we could bring you back." I was shocked. I hadn't expected clients to go that far for me. The president's father emphasized that the tax department had been thriving because of my contributions. Not only had I managed my own clients effectively, but I had also helped other colleagues with theirs. "You knew more than even Camden did," the president added. "If you hadn't turned down the promotion to department head, you would have been in a much higher position by now." The president's face showed regret. Willow looked stunned, as if she was struggling with the idea that I could have been her superior. The president apologized for making me resign in the first place, clearly realizing the mistake they had made. He asked if I would consider taking back my resignation, explaining that according to his father, I was indispensable to the company. While I appreciated this sudden change in perspective, I hesitated to accept. Before I could respond, Camden interrupted, visibly upset. He protested the president's decision, questioning why I was chosen over him. Willow quickly backed him up, praising Camden's leadership and expressing disbelief that I was being favored. But the president wasn't having it. He sternly addressed them, revealing that since I had resigned, numerous complaints had surfaced from the tax department. It seemed Camden had been shifting his workload onto others, even handing off some of Willow's work to subordinates. Camden's face turned pale as the president exposed the truth. Camden had been dumping his client work onto others while accusing me of being a thief. The irony of the situation became clear as the president explained how Camden had been manipulating the system all along. To make matters worse, the president brought up rumors about Camden and Willow's romantic involvement. Camden tried to brush it off, claiming he was just mentoring Willow as her superior, but the president wasn't convinced. He had receipts from the accounting department showing expensive dinners that Camden had charged to the company. Confronted with the evidence, Camden was at a loss for words, sweating profusely. Willow turned ghostly pale, realizing the seriousness of the situation. The president accused them both of neglecting their duties, inflating expense claims, and violating company policy by having an affair, especially while Camden was married. In a calm but firm manner, the president announced their immediate termination. Camden and Willow tried to resist. Camden desperately pleaded, "I have a family." Willow echoed his sentiment, her voice shaking with fear at the thought of being fired. She promised to apologize to me and others for piling work on us, but it was too late. Her concern about her reputation only heightened her desperation. She begged for a second chance, but the damage was done. Sensing their desperation, I couldn't help but offer some advice. "Why don't you stop resisting? It's undignified," I said calmly. Camden glared at me and snapped, "Shut up! What would a single person like you know?" I sighed and replied, "Camden, you are the one who got me fired. It's just karma. What goes around comes around. Maybe it's time to take some responsibility." Camden looked away, clearly frustrated, while Willow bit her lip in distress. I knew more about their misconduct and turned to the president with a smile, asking, "Should I share the rest?" Both Camden and Willow immediately panicked, trying to stop me from revealing more, but I issued them a warning. Wrongdoings eventually come to light, and they should face reality before things got even worse. At that, Camden and Willow collapsed to their knees, pleading for mercy. The president, however, had made up his mind and fired them on the spot. Later, I revealed the full extent of Camden and Willow's misdeeds, including how Camden had faked business trips to spend days with Willow, and how they had bullied other employees into quitting. They would give them sudden tasks with impossible deadlines, making their lives miserable until they left. Some of those employees had asked me to stay quiet at the time, but since they had moved on to better jobs, I decided it was time to speak up. The president was furious at the revelations, especially about the inflated expense claims. He expressed his anger over how they had manipulated the system and planned to cut Camden and Willow's final pay. Camden, with tears in his eyes, begged the president not to dock his salary, fearing the impact on his family, but the truth about his affair with Willow had already spread. It led to Camden's divorce, and both of them now faced compensation claims as part of the lawsuit. I became aware of the full situation when Camden reached out to me, asking for help persuading the president to reconsider their firings. Desperate, Camden and Willow had found themselves in a dire situation. Because of the tight-knit nature of the tax industry, word of their misconduct had spread fast, making it nearly impossible for them to find new jobs. They struggled to make ends meet, and eventually both were forced to take on day labor at construction sites, a far cry from their previous office roles. Willow would often call me, crying and pleading for help. "Harper, please help, I just wanted a better life. I never really liked Camden," she sobbed over the phone. But despite her tears, I couldn't ignore the fact that their situation was a consequence of their own actions. Many people, myself included, had suffered because of their behavior. I firmly reminded Willow, "You can't unring a bell. What's done is done. The consequences you're facing now are because of the choices you made." Willow's protests were filled with regret, but there was nothing she could do to change the outcome. She had to face the reality of her actions, just as Camden did. As for me, I felt a sense of closure. Though their downfall didn't bring me joy, it brought a sense of justice for the unfair treatment I and others had endured. While they struggled with the mess they had created, I was ready to move forward, knowing that sometimes what goes around truly does come around. That said, I decided to distance myself from the chaos of the corporate world. Even though the president begged me to come back, I had no desire to return. Once I had been told to resign, the door was closed for me. Instead, I found peace helping out at a friend's small tax office. It was a way to earn some extra money while enjoying a much more relaxed lifestyle. I no longer had to deal with the stress and drama that came with working in a big company. Looking ahead, I began to dream about starting my own tax office. I imagined a place where I could serve my clients in a personal and meaningful way, without all the red tape and corporate rules. I wanted to create an environment where I could focus fully on my clients' needs and be on equal terms with them. As a tax accountant, my goal was to provide a service where my clients felt valued, not treated like just another number in a system. This marked the start of a new chapter in my life. It was a chapter filled with excitement and new opportunities. I was free to pursue what truly mattered to me, creating something of my own and building stronger relationships with the people I worked with. My second life was just beginning, and I couldn't wait to see where this journey would take me. No longer tied down by corporate demands, I felt lighter and more in control of my future. Every day brought a new sense of purpose, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. My focus was clear: to build a business where I could thrive and where my clients could trust that their needs were my top priority. As I moved forward, I knew this new path was the one I had been waiting for, a chance to grow both personally and professionally in ways I hadn't thought possible before. With a heart full of optimism and determination, I eagerly anticipated